Okay. Hello. What is going on today? So, I got a... my original intention was to write a blog post about this, but based on the fact it's taken me ages to do so, and the fact that I'm really not very good at writing about myself and writing about these sorts of things, I thought I'd just try and mix and match it with just a general video. So what I want to talk about is going back on a few of my old designs. I want to talk about some of the stuff that's been kind of released and re-released of mine recently, and I want to talk about how I edit it and kind of how I approach kind of writing for RPG adventures in general. So in case this is the first time you've seen my stuff, hi, my name's Joe. It says so down there. That's my website. Those are my links. I don't talk in front of the camera very often, so this is kind of new to me, so that's probably why I'm not making a lot of eye contact. Hi. But I write a monthly, I tend to try and write 2 or 3 monthly adventures for Dungeon World or for other systems, mostly for Dungeon World up to this point. And this month, my 2 of my oldest adventure kind of kits, if you like, Shadows of Umberto and the Green Scar, were both in this month's Bundle of Holding, which, if you don't know, is a it's kind of like the Humble Bundle, which is like a video game thing, but it's a bundle of RPG related products. So all sorts of RPG products, old and new, under a certain theme, get sold, and a bit goes to charity, a bit goes to creators, bit goes to everyone. So it's all good. It's all good stuff, and I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy that my stuff's ended up in that collection alongside a lot of other really great material that that's really high praise. I've praised it a lot in the past, so it's really nice. But the reason why I'm making this video and having a chat about all this is because one of the first things I thought of when I found out I was actually going to be part of this collection was, oh crap, what do I do about Shadows of Umberto? Because it's one of my oldest pieces of writing now. I actually wrote it in 2013, I think, and I played it quite a bit before then. So I found out with like 2-3 days to go, and this is just after Christmas, and I thought, well, you know what the hell, I'm just going to try and redo this. I've had kind of bits and pieces of it in my in various files across my computer, and I thought, right, I'm just going to redo this bit. I'm going to rebuild all of this stuff that doesn't work so well, and really try and make something of this. So so that's what I did. So I blitzed through it in a couple of days, and redid a lot of the old content, made it a lot more kind of easy to read and recognise, I think. I hope. Still waiting for good feedback on that. But certainly I was very pleased with it, and yeah, and got it out in time, just about. So I wanted to talk a bit about that, because it comes up a lot. If you're watching this having come from the Dungeon World Tavern, the community on Google+, we've talked about this. As it happened, we talked about it like the very same week. There was a good thread that went round about like dungeon design, and I got called New Wave, which is weird because I'm incredibly sad 31-year-old English man who writes crap for a living. So that's really weird to be referred to as New Wave. There's also all sorts of other really great stuff. Probably first and foremost in terms of dungeon design at the moment would be Perilous. I should really get this right. Perilous Wilds. There we go. Perilous Wilds by Jason Lutz, which, as you can see, is never far from my keyboard, because I need to steal its format frequently and regularly in order to make Patreon money. So so there's loads of great stuff in there, and loads of great sort of formats of Dungeon World Adventure, and other RPG adventures too. I mean, the Dungeon World's a good system, but a lot of this stuff might apply to, I don't know, Pathfinder, Numenera, D&D, of course, all sorts of standards. The problem with Dungeon World is that there isn't like one unified way of presenting an adventure. There's no one unified way of saying, hey, this is a good guide to help you, Mr. New GM or prospective GM, out, and really get you thinking about the world and get you kind of inspired and everything else. There isn't any one sort of document, as good as the original guide is, there isn't sort of enough stuff in there to say, hey, here's like a starter adventure of, the world of da-da-da, get writing, have fun. So that's not the best thing, because it's also strangely a really fun system to write for. It's really cool to. I'm actually going to delete that because there's a lot of stuff there. Let's just leave that green fields open there. It's a bit nicer. What was I saying? Yeah, it's really fun to write adventures for Dungeon World somehow. Like the formatting for GM stuff is really nice. It's really evocative. It's really imaginative. The questions which you're sort of compelled to ask as a Dungeon World GM. It's a system which means you have to think very much on your feet. So you have to do a lot of thinking, like, okay, so I haven't decided what's going to be happens if they turn left or if they turn right. I have to decide it on the fly. So as a sort of writer, as a prospective writer of this kind of cool stuff, and I use that in quotes because I still don't really consider myself much of a writer. I consider myself a designer who happens to write stuff. But hey, that's by the by. When you're writing a Dungeon World adventure, it's really fun to be like, oh, well, maybe this will happen if they go left, and maybe this will happen if they go right, and you write all this stuff. And then if you write too much of that stuff, then you kind of fall into the trap of railroading players, or just presenting what would be what might be a very good, say, D&D adventure, where you have to kind of lay out every kind of step of the way, or most steps of the way. But a not so good Dungeon World one, where actually a lot of the entertainment value comes in just the GM going, well, I don't know, like, what is there if it turns left? Like, what is a goblin? There's a goblin down the side there, but what's a goblin to you? Do you care? If not, let's turn right instead and carry on playing. So there's a lot to kind of account for in an adventure. So anyway, so yeah, what was I saying before? Umberto. Umberto was kind of more like that. Umberto was a combination of A, me learning how to play, B, like play and GM at the same time anyway, because it was still relatively new to me at that point. I think, well, Shadows of Umberto was like the second thing I released at all, so it was like maybe the third or fourth time I've played. It was like the first concerted campaign of like, me and my playtest group spent like 2 to 3 months just in this one location. So it was the first kind of body of content where I went, yeah, we can, from the like, I think maybe a dozen sessions we played total, I can drill that down to like 3 or 4 really good like locations and adventures from that. So it came off as a little railroady, I think, in retrospect. It came across as being, actually, you know what, I will open up the original file. I've got it on here somewhere. Umberto single pages. Yeah, here we go. Right, here we go. So here we go, that's better. Here's the original, Shadows of Umberto, a dusty barbaric adventure pack for Dungeon World. So I called it an adventure pack. I didn't want to call it like an adventure or a campaign or anything like that, even though it kind of was. But it carried a lot of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff in here. There's fronts, which is like the Dungeon World thing of like, this is what bad guys do. They do front stuff. They have grim portents, which may or may not happen, and there's a cast, and it was quite by the numbers. And in retrospect, a lot of this stuff was very relevant for my game, and I thought it might be relevant for others. Emphasis on might. But the problem is there's a lot of stuff which might be relevant and ultimately isn't. And that's not ideal, because as a Dungeon World GM, you kind of want to have more referential stuff than not. So like, there's loads of stuff in here. Like there's a few custom moves. There's like a general overview of like impressions of the area, but a lot of stuff that I didn't go into enough detail in, I think, as well. There's some stuff I went into way too much detail on, and other things which I didn't go into any detail on. So there was loads of stuff there, and I wanted to talk today about how I changed that. And the way I wanted to talk about how I changed that was to talk about, I wanted to use another adventure that I'm working on as an example, another previous adventure set in a desert location, as an example of how I went about taking all of this, of like, there's a front here, and there's an enemy here, and there's a nice picture there, and turn it into something more like, and I should probably have opened this up beforehand. Where's that file gone? Where have you gone? That one? That one. There there we go, turn into something more like this, which obviously on the face of it looks quite similar, but there is a bit more method to the madness here, where you've got like cool introduction, blah de blah, more cool introduction, but like some specific things here, like stakes, like what's all this about the stakes here, and like the questions and all of this malarkey, and then more like backstory. Like there was a reason why I modified it to have this sort of format, and I've just realised you can't quite see the top of that again. There we go, let's zoom out a little bit. There we go. There's like loads of backstory here, and the pictures are laid out. I mean, part of this is obviously design stuff, which I'll go into in a different place. But you know, these items are all about like, you know, why like this? What's so different about that compared to like that, right? So I wanted to talk about that, and the real gist of why I do that the way I do that is something called Squire. I call it Squire, 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 which is the backbone of how I would plan out an adventure. So let's talk about that. Planning an adventure, you need, I would say, at least for a Dungeon World adventure, and probably for most other adventures as well, you need to have some stakes. Some stakes. Stakes. What will our campaign resolve? What may be lost or changed forever? This isn't anything new if you've read the Dungeon World rulebook. This is something which is quite specifically written under the kind of GMing section of like when you're making fronts and stuff like that. Like what is at stake? What in the long term is at stake? Doesn't matter if your players have been playing like a 6-month campaign in the wild deserts of Umberto, or whether, hey, you got one of your players wanted a desert today and you needed an adventure. Like whether your players are going to be in this desert region for a day or a year or whatever, doesn't matter. What's going to change in this region should they fail? So the stakes aren't going to be resolved in one. They might be resolved in one session, but it's very unlikely they're going to be resolved in one session. And they are going to have long-reaching resolutions. It isn't just going to be like, it isn't even going to be like this building is going to be here or not. Like that's like a stake of a single dungeon. This is like the whole region potentially. This is like the wider world. So like the Temple of Dur, where they're doing their dungeoning this session, if that place like stands or falls, that's a very small stake in the context of like a setup like Shadows of Umberto. Like if the whole desert at stake? Yeah, it kind of is. So like this is what I've tried to set up. The details behind Shadows of Umberto is, as I've kind of tried to drill down into here, the party come to Umberto for in the context of this because they're having bad dreams, and Umberto is known as a place where there's all sorts of mystics and scary dudes knocking about who might be able to tell them about that. And they come into a bit of a powder keg, this mix of a very condensed, towering cityscape, full of all sorts of different peoples trying to get along, many of which don't trust magic, as kind of set out in the plot here, with a nobility which kind of have a stranglehold on magic. So that's the initial gist, is that you've got kind of the unwashed masses who don't know a thing about magic and kind of don't trust it, and the people at the top who rely on magic and have a stranglehold over them. And kind of caught in the middle, you've got this kind of new king, the young caliph, who he's technically a bad guy, but at the same time he is also very innocent. So like how he might be characterised in an adventure could go both ways, and we'll talk about kind of that sort of idea of going both ways in a minute. So we're talking about Squire here, SQUIRE. We're talking about these initial points: stakes, questions, understandings, impressions, rewards, and enemies. That is what that's what Squire stands for, and that is the backbone of stuff that can go into an adventure. Stakes: what will our campaign resolve? What may be lost or changed forever? So, yeah, you get the idea. Questions. Questions is the sort of thing which is going to get resolved in a session. It's going to be found out what might be interesting or relevant in the next few games, as I've put it up here. So these questions are set up for players coming to Umberto for the first time. If you've read, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend digging it out. If you've read Sage's initial dungeon setup, where it starts something like you're hiding behind a cart, the cart's on fire, there's a noble behind you bleeding, people are firing arrows at you, and then he asks a load of questions underneath. He says stuff like, who's the noble, who's firing on you, why is it important this noble survive to you, and what do you do? Those are the sorts of short-term questions. These are the things that your players and their characters need to know right now in order to continue playing the game, in effect. They're also, I've taken that a step further, and also you might see this in Perilous Deeps and Perilous Wilds. Perilous Deeps is the companion piece, which, full disclosure, I wrote a bit for. So Perilous Deeps is a selection of dungeons using this framework as a guide. And you can see in there, especially Adam Coble's frankly awesome dungeon all about kind of Death's Domain. He writes a lot of kind of slightly further reaching questions, which aren't necessarily going to be answered right at the start. It's not like, oh shit, this cart's on fire, what do you do? That's a question that needs answering in the first session. It needs answering in the first minute of the first session, ideally, else we don't know what we're doing. But he might ask things like, what, like I've done here, like, do dreams mean a lot to your people? Like, why? These are things which we want to try and work out about the world together, which would be different in my campaign than they would be in yours. So me as a GM asking my players, they will have a different answer about, do dreams mean a lot to your people, than your players might, if you're the GM. And they might answer, no, actually dreams don't make a blind bit of difference to our people, I just am having trouble sleeping and it's a problem. You might say fine, and you move on to the next question, and that's that. You don't have to ask these rote. You would ideally just ask them as they naturally come up in play. So something like, are your people at war with Umberto? That might come up in character creation. How is magic treated where you're from? Well, that's definitely going to come up in character creation if anyone rolls a wizard or maybe a bard. How has millennia of magic use changed how Umbertans look? So that's the sort of thing of setting up, well, what's so different about this corner of the world what's going to be cool for us playing compared to someone else playing? So someone might say, how has millennia of magic use changed how it looks? Someone might say, oh, well, they've got little wings, but some of them have got little nubby wings, and some of them have got full-fledged wings. That's something I've just brought up completely off the top of my head. When I played this campaign, wings had nothing to do with anything, but yours might, and that's why it's not necessarily an important question to answer, but interesting and relevant. Might be for quite a few games if it was something like that. So yeah, that's stakes, that's questions. Understandings. Obviously you're reading all this now as I'm saying it, so you're getting an idea of this. I'll try and knock through these a bit quicker now. Understandings are things that, when someone spouts lore, or when they're like, oh, I'd know this, you can be like, yeah, you totally know this, that's fine. So just in case it's not clear in the context of the rest of the information in the book, I write about the understandings here. So yeah, things every party needs to know about the spout lore. Umberto's a desert city. It's like, well, duh, of course you'd know that. Of course your world-weary traveller would know that Umberto, well, yeah, of course, that's a desert city you go to where mystics read your dreams and stuff like that. You might ask follow-up questions as a result of that. You might be like, oh, Umberto's a desert city where loads and loads of magic goes on from the rich and powerful elite there. How is magic treated where you come from? So they might follow on to other things. And I haven't actually put a lot of understandings in this one, partially because I ran out of space, and partially because there is quite a lot of information in general. And these 3 pages, for example, of content, they have understandings in them as well. They just are, spread over 3 pages and a bit more flowery. But when you need to drill down, when you're just looking at a page, you're playing a game like I'm sort of sat in front of my computer right now, and I've got a hangout window over here with 4 expectant players and a PDF page on this side, or a page open over here. This is what I want to see. I want to be like, oh yeah, they'd know all about desert cities, right? Yeah, of course they would. Yeah. And then finally we've got rewards and encounters. I called them enemies earlier, but you can use either term. It's just an easy way to remember, really. Rewards and encounters. both fairly explanatory, especially when you think of encounters as enemies. Rewards actually surprisingly come up a lot less often than I'd think, partially because there's a very good treasure table in the basic book, which I often rely on. I recommend it, even if you're like just rolling a d6 on it or whatever. It's pretty handy. And for when I need to be like, oh yeah, crap, these guys want to loot the body, I better find something, like that's the easiest thing to go to. And also, like, it's strange how often when you're playing something like Dungeon World, which is more about the story and more narrative compared to, say, I suppose say like D&D, although I haven't played much D&D, but suppose something like D&D, looting the bodies just people keep forgetting. I forget all the time when I play, and my players forget all the time when I'm GMing. It just doesn't come up. Even though one of the questions is, did we loot a memorable treasure? Like, the amount of times where it's like, no, we didn't find anything this session, like memorable or otherwise, I guess we'll just carry on, is really surprising. So, like, rewards don't tend to be that much, and I tend to put in things which are, as you can see here, a bit more variable, or like like where you came to find out about your bad dreams, right? So like, this is the reward that you guys are going to be looking for. In a way, writing rewards as a kind of go-to section here is less about having a loot table, because that's never going to fit on one page for easy reference. It's more about saying like, hey, you meet such and such, he's wandering around the busy marketplace. You totally want to find him, because after all, he's going to be the one who can help you, and then you do a quick look here, get a respite from your dark dreams, right? So go get him. You know, it's a way of reminding yourself of what the players might be after, and giving them a reason to go get it. And then finally, encounters. This could be really self-explanatory, and often when I write an adventure, it is. It might just be your wandering monsters table, in effect. I went a little bit further with this in as much as making these a bit broader, just saying what the encounters might be. These are more scenes than actual one-off encounters, and it kind of ties into the Perilous Wilds style of areas that I've done a few pages later. So like, the enemies come much later and are shared between a couple of kind of encounters and locations. Right at the back here, creatures, here we go. So like Crooked Guards, Overzealous Wazirs, which are like the other guards, Magi, and so on and so forth, are all mentioned in the back of the book anyway. So I don't have to go into huge detail here about your enemies. But if I'm writing a Patreon adventure, as you've probably noticed before, a lot of the time that's exactly what I do, is I just write about who the enemies are, what they want, their instincts, all the sort of good stuff that you tend to write for Dungeon World enemies if you've got a bit of time in advance anyway. So that's Squire. That is for people who are curious about like how Shadows of Umberto is different now compared to how it was before, and also if you're watching this wondering how I tend to start with writing my adventures, and you want to write some adventures of your own, which you should do, by the way. That tends to be how I start. I'll be like, first of all, obviously, before you got all this, you want to have some kind of theme, be it something you need to come up with very quickly because you got a game tonight, or because you want to write the next best thing in on Drive for RPG and throw it up, or start your own Patreon or whatever. Like, I think you can do far worse than start with a Squire, a thing, a general overview, whether it makes it to the final product or not, because sometimes mine don't. But you want to know, you the writer want to know for your GMs who will read it, you will want to know like what's at stake, what questions you would want to be answering straight away, what things all the players are just going to know, where you're like, yeah, of course you know that stuff. What things they're going to be looking after, what's their rewards, and what sort of things and situations are they going to encounter? Squire. So those are the gist of what I would do in that. Now, what you were probably asking for like the first 10 minutes of the show was this all about. This is a front cover from an adventure I did like over a year ago. I did a quote-unquote scary collection of adventures about October 2014 this came out, and off the back of re-releasing Shadow of Umberto, I want to re-release a lot of my old adventures, get a nice concise collection, get it ready for print, get it print compatible, because the other problem about a lot of these PDFs, especially this one, was they aren't really, you can't just throw them into the Drive-Thru-RPG setup and be like, yep, print away, let's get a proof please. All the bleeds and everything else aren't set up properly. So there's a real vested interest to rewrite it for that reason. And there's and also like there's an opportunity for a lot of these old ones to kind of either formalise or outright put in this kind of Squire style setup. So what I wanted to go through today was I've done it for this one. I've gone through the Tomb of the Golden Child. I've reworded it. I've started with the Squire setup and a few other bits and bobs, and I want to go through that today. So I think what I'll do is I'll take a brief, because as you can already hear my voice is going, so I'm going to take a brief break and just grab a drink and just gather my thoughts, and then in part 2 I will go over what I've done, which is where all of this comes in. So I will see you in a moment.